Hi, I'm Dr. J. Franklin Shults. I have another book recommendation for you, and this one's called When Cops Kill, The Aftermath of a Critical Incident. It's written by a friend of mine, Lance LaRusso, who is a very pro-police attorney down in the Atlanta area and a former police officer as well as a licensed attorney. He does a lot of work advocating for police officers, both in his legal practice and as a volunteer. This is a little bit different than some of the books that I recommend otherwise, because most of the books that I recommend are going to be relationship books, mental health books, how the brain works, how to be a better person, those kinds of things. But let me tell you why I'm recommending When Cops Kill, The Aftermath of a Critical Incident. One of the things that we know about stress is if we have an expectation of what's going to happen to us and what kind of impact that's going to have on our thinking and our behavior and our physical and mental health, which are connected. That's called stress inoculation, and we found that that's helpful rather than people going into an incident and then having all of this rush of experiences, the sensory distortions, the withdrawing of friends, the isolation that happens, we may have flashbacks and self-doubt, survival guilt, all these kinds of things. If we know about these phenomena and how natural and normal they are, not comfortable by any means, but survivable, then when we do start to experience them, we don't say, oh my gosh, I must be going crazy. What's wrong with me? We're saying, oh, well, Mom told me there would be days like this, and I'm just going through a normal thing. It's very uncomfortable, but I know how to cope with it, and I know where to get some help to cope with it. So that's where When Cops Kill comes in, because it is a very comprehensive look at officer-involved shootings and what you can expect, particularly from the procedural and legal side. Make no mistake about it, when we get into law enforcement, we know that there's a possibility that we might be forced to use deadly force. In fact, although it is a relatively rare occurrence, the opportunity or the requirement to make the decision whether to use deadly force is very, very common. In fact, a study that the FBI published in the FBI Law Enforcement Bulletin a couple of years ago talked about 70%. My own study, the Violence Against Law Officers Research Project, found about the same, from 60 to 80% of police officers in any given 2-year period will have to make the decision whether or not to use deadly force. So in other words, almost every uniformed person, every person who's out there dealing with the public, dealing with offenders, almost all of them are going to have to make the decision. Now, very few of us are going to have to pull the trigger or do something that causes the death of another person, but almost all of us are going to have to make that decision. So, first of all, getting it in your mind that that's a real possibility and settling that moral question. This is Chaplain Shults' advice here. If you haven't struggled with that issue, could I do that? Is that something that I have the capacity to do? Is that something that I can morally justify? Is that something I could live with myself if I did? You really need to wrestle a little bit with that question before that kind of incident comes up. And I'm kind of surprised how many people really haven't thought that through, because they may think to themselves, oh, it's rare, it's probably never going to happen, and I can deal with it when it comes. And I'm telling you, 8 out of 10 cops in any given 2-year period are going to have to make that decision. Whether they decide not to pull the trigger or to pull the trigger, you're going to be faced with that scenario. So it's important for us to understand that when we face that scenario, and in fact, if we have to pull the trigger, whether we injure somebody or kill somebody, we're not only just doing our job, and it may be something that's very clearly heroic, the classic hostage, bank robber, police officers, no choice, everybody's like, oh yeah, he's a hero. Let me tell you, no matter what happens, if you kill somebody in the line of duty, you are, regardless of what other labels you might have, you are instantly a suspect in a homicide. So if you can imagine the stress of being investigated for an officer-involved shooting, and that's always been true, and it's always been tough. But let me tell you, I'm videotaping this in the latter part of 2015, And there's never been a more difficult time for police officers to expect to be prosecuted and even persecuted for even the most justifiable of behaviors. So this book is really critical to give you some comfort and some planning. I'll just take a look at the chapter subject material that Lance covers. Talks about the lawful use of force and discusses the constitutional and statutory and case law analysis of use of force. Talks about how to document that. Talks about what kind of investigation is going to happen and what your role in that is. Are you compelled to tell everything that you know about that because of your employment, or since you are essentially a suspect in a potential crime, can you reserve the right to remain silent? And for a police officer, that can be a career-ending decision if you make the wrong call, and you need to know what your rights are. Lance talks about the difference between the criminal investigation and the administrative investigation. And Lance doesn't say this specifically in the book, but I've always been taught that there are at least 5 ways that police officers can get in trouble. They can be sued for civil rights in federal court. They can be sued for civil rights violation in state court or tort in state court. They can be prosecuted criminally in federal court for violation of civil rights. They can be prosecuted in state court. And then, of course, they've got department sanctions. And I would add a 6th thing to that, since I was taught that many, many years ago, is the personal costs that we have in dealing with the media and dealing with our own psyche after being so close to mortality and perhaps dealing with taking of another life. It also talks about the possibility of revocation of your peace officer certification, talks about protecting your spouse and family legally and your finances as well as your survival, and how other police officers and other persons may react to you, and then talks about some kind of personal fortitude and some financial and stability planning for you and your family. So, very valuable book, a pretty easy read. And Lance also assures us that that the profits from this book are going to go to help charities that benefit police officers. Lance, I know, for example, is very active in the organization Hunting for Heroes. And if you don't know about that, then you need to look that up online as well, huntingforheroes.org. This is Joel Shults, and this is my book review for the day. I hope that you take a chance to order this online and see what Lance has to say about your profession and your future. And also, of course, while I'm recommending somebody else's book, I'll recommend one that I might profit from a little bit. That's The Badge and the Brain, Street Smart Force. You can find this at streetsmartforce.com or joelshults.com. That's JOELSHULTS. No C's, no Z's. Go to that website, and if you want to hook up with my Twitter account or get on my Facebook or check out my blog, or see some of my articles on police1.com, or just want to write to me and tell me what I'm doing right or wrong or ask me a question, I'll be glad to hear from you. Thanks for tuning in, and we look forward to seeing you again. Stay tuned. We hope that what I share with you will help you be a better person.